Welcome back to the deep dive, where we really try to unpack the complex stuff, make it, engaging. And today, we're diving into something that's both really serious and, frankly, urgent. It touches on human vulnerability, the challenges of custodial settings, and some pretty advanced technology. To really get a sense of this, just think about this fact for a moment. In 2020, suicide was the most common cause of death for people incarcerated in Europe. More common than COVID-19, more common than drug overdose.
Yeah, that's a truly sobering statistic. Really sets the stage.
It really does. So our focus today is squarely on this critical issue: self-harm and suicide in prisons, in other custodial settings, globally. And we're going to explore how these emerging contactless monitoring technologies are being looked at, investigated as a potential solution. A complex one, though. Our mission really is to unpack a brand new protocol for a global scoping review. Think of it like the blueprint for a huge scientific investigation. We want to understand the scale of the problem, look at the traditional monitoring methods and their limitations, which are pretty significant, then examine the promise, but also the challenges of these new technologies. And crucially, understand the steps researchers are taking to pull together all the existing knowledge.
Right, mapping the landscape, essentially.
Exactly. And our main source for this isn't the final review itself, but the plan behind it. It's this detailed protocol for a global scoping review titled Contactless Monitoring to Prevent Self-Harm and Suicide in Custodial Settings. And it's fascinating because you see the whole scientific process laid out, this really careful, comprehensive plan to gather and analyze all the evidence.
It really is. And it's so important to stress this isn't just about technology for technology's sake. Not at all. It's fundamentally about, well, saving lives, improving well-being for a population that's incredibly vulnerable. When we talk about people in custody, we're often talking about individuals facing immense pressures, pre-existing mental health issues, systemic disadvantages, things that incarceration just makes worse. But it's also about the staff. The impact on the people working in these really tough environments, trying to ensure safety, often with tools that are, frankly, outdated or problematic. So the whole issue just cries out for innovative but very carefully thought through solutions.
Absolutely. And as you said, it's not just one country's problem, it's a global public health crisis. Okay, let's unpack this. So first, let's really confront what the source calls a silent crisis: the sheer scale of self-harm and suicide behind bars. The research points out that these are major contributors to the global burden of disease globally. And people in custody face a markedly increased risk. That's the term they use, markedly increased.
Yeah, and the specific numbers in the source really, they really hit home. So for the UK, they estimate the prevalence of self-harm is about 5 to 6% for incarcerated men. But for women, it jumps dramatically. We're looking at 20 to 24%.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It's a massive disparity. And then if you look at suicide, the most tragic outcome. In England and Wales, back in 2020, the rate for incarcerated men with a history of self-harm was 334 per 100,000.
334.
Yeah. Compare that to those with no history of self-harm. Their rate was 95 per 100,000. Still high, but much lower.
So that history is a massive red flag.
A huge predictor, absolutely. And it's not just adults. Adolescents, so we're talking 10 to 24-year-olds in the criminal justice system, also at much higher risk for suicidal behaviors compared to their peers outside the system.
Which raises all sorts of questions about intervening early, doesn't it?
It does. And then there's that statistic you mentioned at the start, suicide being the top cause of death in European prisons in 2020. If you look at Australia, similar picture. In 2022, over 5% of people leaving prison reported self-harming while inside. And in 2021-22, a full quarter, 25% of all deaths in Australian prisons were suicide or self-inflicted, with 22% specifically by hanging.
Just staggering figures. They're not just numbers, are they? They're people. When you hear all that, the increased rates, women, adolescents, the sheer numbers, what does it tell you about that custodial environment, the pressure, the vulnerability?
Well, it paints a picture of an environment under immense strain, doesn't it? Where existing vulnerabilities are often magnified, not mitigated. It points towards systemic issues within the institutions themselves.
Yeah, it seems like incarceration itself becomes a risk factor.
It certainly appears that way. And the scary thing is, this burden is likely to increase. Why? Because the global imprisonment rate is actually going up each year.
Right.
And it's growing faster than the overall population. So more people entering these high-risk environments.
More people, and often with very complex needs, I imagine.
Exactly. The source highlights these really complex health profiles. Get this. About half of the global prison population with non-affective psychosis or major depression also have a comorbid substance use disorder.
Half. So a dual diagnosis is common.
Extremely common. And that combination, that comorbidity, it doesn't just add up the risks, it multiplies them. It increases the danger of other fatal events too, like intoxication, overdose, withdrawal complications.
So it's a perfect storm, really.
Hmm.
Mental health issues, substance use, the environment itself.
Precisely. It's a confluence of factors. Individual vulnerability meeting systemic challenges and a rising population.
Which makes you wonder how the traditional ways of keeping people safe can possibly keep up. Okay, so let's transition to that. What are the traditional ways? How do custodial settings currently try to manage these risks?
Well, the current approaches are aimed at minimizing all sorts of adverse outcomes, self-harm, suicide attempts, problems from substance use, even issues from restraint or medication. And the source really focuses on two main traditional methods: risk assessments and visual observations.
Okay, risk assessments. What do those involve?
So these are basically structured evaluations done at specific points in time, usually when someone first enters custody or if their situation changes significantly. They're informed partly by, clinical intuition, but also standardized screening tools. Staff are looking for signs of intoxication, withdrawal, checking consciousness levels, looking for head injuries, potential substance concealment, and crucially, checking their history for any previous self-harm or suicide attempts. Like a snapshot of their risk level at that moment.
Exactly, a snapshot. And based on that snapshot, they decide if someone needs more monitoring, like constant observation, maybe checks every 15 minutes, or if the monitoring can perhaps be stepped down a bit.
Right. And the other method, visual observations.
Yeah, visual observations are pretty much what they sound like. Staff physically watching for signs of risk. This could mean checking for signs of life. Are they moving? If they look asleep, trying to rouse them gently, watching their chest rise and fall. And these checks happen either right at the cell door, peering through a spy hole, a flap, maybe a perspex panel.
Sounds quite intrusive.
It is. Or, in some places, they use CCTV, closed-circuit television, to watch remotely. But there's a big catch here, something the source calls the health professional gap.
Okay.
Monitoring actual vital signs, heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, temperature, things that give you real physiological data. That's often beyond the scope of the regular custodial staff. They are medically trained for that.
So you need a nurse or a doctor. Exactly. Which means getting that crucial data depends on having health professionals available right there, right then. And that's not always the case.
Which feels like a pretty major gap if someone's deteriorating medically.
It's a huge limitation.
And this is where, as you said earlier, it gets really interesting, or maybe worrying. The source spells out quite a few limitations with these traditional methods. These limitations are really driving the search for something new, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. The shortcomings are quite stark when you lay them out. First, as you picked up on, is the intrusiveness. Those physical checks through spy holes, flaps in the door, or perspex panels. It's a constant observation that can feel deeply invasive.
Erodes dignity, you'd imagine.
Definitely. It can increase distress rather than reduce it. Then there's a risk of misinterpretation. Custodial staff, they're doing their best, but they aren't doctors. They might see someone who's seriously medically unwell, maybe diabetic shock, maybe something else, and mistake it for being drunk or high.
And that delay in getting the right help could be fatal.
Potentially, yes, a critical delay. We also have technological gaps with things like CCTV. A lot of facilities still have outdated systems. Poor image quality, blurry footage, and blind spots in the cells where things can happen unseen, even if someone is watching the monitor.
So the tech itself isn't always reliable.
Not always, no. Then there's the time lag problem. Checks are scheduled maybe every 15 minutes, maybe every 30. But a crisis, a self-harm attempt, a medical emergency that can happen between those checks.
In that gap.
Exactly. Someone could be in serious trouble for minutes before the next check comes around. That time can be critical.
Yeah.
The source also mentions the danger of over-reliance on these methods. Like staff might rely so much on the scheduled check that they miss other subtler signs or maybe don't engage as much proactively.
Relying on the procedure instead of maybe human connection or observation.
Potentially, yes, to the exclusion of others, as the source puts it. And finally, while the ethics of new tech get a lot of focus, even these traditional methods have inherent privacy concerns. Being watched constantly, even for safety, has an impact.
It really paints a picture of a system under pressure, trying its best with tools that have some really serious drawbacks. You can imagine being an officer worried about missing something, or being the person incarcerated, feeling constantly watched, but maybe not truly seen in a moment of crisis.
It really underscores the need for something better, something that enhances safety and respects dignity.
Okay, so that leads us nicely into this potential glimmer of hope.
Mm.
Contactless monitoring. It sounds almost futuristic. What exactly is it?
It is a pretty significant leap, conceptually at least. It's about using various technologies to monitor vital signs, behaviors, risk factors remotely, continuously. And the key word here is contactless. So no physical wires or sensors attached to the person.
And non-intrusive, you mentioned earlier.
Exactly, that's the big draw. It aims to be non-intrusive, unlike those spy hole checks. The technologies behind it are quite diverse. You've got things like radar-based systems. These can detect tiny movements, like the chest moving with breathing, or even heartbeats, sometimes even through blankets or clothing.
Really? That's sensitive.
Yeah, some systems are incredibly sensitive. Then you layer on machine learning. So AI algorithms analyze all the data coming from the sensors. They look for patterns, deviations from the norm, things that might signal a problem brewing.
Like an early warning system.
Precisely. And a related concept is edge computing. This means processing the data right there near the sensor or on the device itself instead of sending it all back to a central server first.
Why is that important?
Speed. It allows for faster insights in real time. If there's an anomaly, the system can raise an alarm almost instantly. The tech includes both image-based systems using cameras and non-image-based ones, like radar. The source even mentions something called photonic radar as an example of really advanced tech for detecting vital signs without contact.
Wow. So this isn't just a concept, it's actively being developed.
So absolutely. The source notes this technology has evolved markedly in the last decade.
Mhm.
And it's not just for prisons. It has a broad array of potential application scenarios.
Like where else?
Well, national security, aged care. Imagine monitoring elderly people at home without disturbing them. Home care generally, med tech, even livestock and veterinary services for monitoring animal health.
Okay, so its use in other fields suggests it's a pretty robust area of development.
It really does. The broad applicability highlights the scientific advancement behind it.
So bringing it back to custodial settings, how could this technology specifically help there? What's its intended role?
Its role is seen as a supplement to current methods, not necessarily a replacement for staff or existing procedures.
Right, augmenting, not replacing.
Exactly. The idea is to help staff monitor the well-being of people who are at increased risk while they're in their cells continuously and non-intrusively. The mechanism is pretty straightforward. Continuous monitoring of vital signs, movements, behaviors. If the system detects a deviation, maybe breathing becomes erratic, maybe someone stops moving for too long, something that could signal an impending health event or risk. It raises an alarm in real time. It alerts the staff, who can then go and intervene immediately.
So it directly addresses those limitations we talked about.
It potentially addresses several key ones, yes. It could reduce the need for those intrusive spy hole checks, respecting privacy more, and crucially, it could help prevent those critical events being missed between scheduled checks.
Closing that dangerous time gap.
Exactly, shrinking that window of vulnerability by providing continuous oversight.
So the idea isn't to replace the officers, but to give them better eyes and ears, essentially. Faster, less intrusive information to act on.
That's the goal. Empowering staff with better tools, allowing them to intervene earlier and more effectively.
But you mentioned earlier this idea of over-reliance. Could staff become too reliant on the tech? Maybe pay less attention otherwise?
That is a definite risk, and something the source implicitly acknowledges by stressing this is a supplement. Implementation would need really careful thought about training, protocols, and ensuring staff maintain their own vigilance and human interaction skills. It's about finding the right balance between technological support and human care. You don't want technology to create distance.
A tricky balance to strike, especially in such a high-stakes environment. Okay, so the promise is clear, but we need that reality check now. While it sounds great, you mentioned it's not standard practice yet, why not? What are the hurdles?
Right, this is where we get into the significant challenges. The source makes it clear. Contact-based sensors remain the norm in healthcare for good reasons. A major one is the limited literature on its effectiveness on acutely unwell or deteriorating patients.
So it might work on healthy people in a lab, but what about someone in real crisis?
Exactly. We don't have enough robust evidence yet that it performs reliably under those complex critical conditions. And related to that, its validation against gold standard measurements is unclear. We need proof that the contactless readings consistently match up with proven methods like ECGs or respiration belts, especially in diverse populations and challenging settings. That rigorous validation just isn't fully there yet across the board.
So fundamental questions about reliability and accuracy in real-world critical situations. Okay, let's get specific then. What are the actual technical problems researchers are wrestling with? You mentioned noise and variability.
Yes, noise and variability are huge. Think about a prison cell. It's not a sterile lab. For image-based systems using cameras, a review cited in the source points out several issues. Things like automatically selecting the right part of the image to focus on the person, not their bedding. Dealing with noise and motion artifacts is massive. Someone just shifting position, rolling over, blankets moving, all of that can mess up the signal the camera's trying to read.
Just normal human movement.
Exactly. Then there's monitoring multiple people in one view, detecting signals from far away, merging data from several cameras, and a big word, performing well in low light. Cells aren't always brightly lit. And a fundamental problem for researchers, a lack of publicly available data sets from realistic scenarios. Hard to train the AI without good real-world data.
Right, you need data that reflects the actual environment.
Definitely. Then, for wireless video-based monitoring, another review highlighted minimal testing or validation in clinical settings. And interestingly, a lot of the early work focused on neonates, babies in incubators.
Who are relatively still, I guess.
Relatively still, smaller, maybe easier to monitor than a moving adult. So there's a gap in research for adults and children. That review also found inadequate data for validation. Even in labs, tests weren't long enough. Didn't cover the full range of vital signs needed.
So still foundational work needed there too. What about radar?
Radar-based systems have their own challenges. A big one is body movement interference. Again, normal movements disrupting the signal. There's also a need for better signal processing techniques to handle noisy or low-quality data reliably. Doppler radar specifically needs more work to improve how accurately it estimates breathing and heart rates from the signals it gets.
And the prison environment itself adds problems.
It absolutely does. The source specifically mentions things you might not think about. Ceiling fans, even water moving in pipes when sinks or toilets are flushed.
Wow, that level of background noise.
Yes, all that extra motion can interfere with the radar signals and, crucially, increase false alarms.
Which would undermine trust in the system pretty quickly if staff are constantly chasing non-existent emergencies.
Exactly. Constant false alarms would make the system unusable in practice.
Okay, that's a daunting list of technical challenges. But amidst all that, are there any positive signs on accuracy? Can these systems get close sometimes?
Yes, there are definitely moments of promise, but often with that ideal conditions caveat. The source mentions Doppler radar can match wearable device readings for heart and respiratory rates within about plus or minus 5%. That's pretty good accuracy.
In the right conditions?
In the right conditions, yes. And another study reported even higher accuracy for medical radar, 93 to 100%, compared to standard ECGs and respiration belts.
That sounds very impressive.
It does. Camera-based systems also perform well under ideal conditions, but the source immediately adds they highlight performance variability. So while you can get great results in a controlled lab setting with a willing participant, performance can fluctuate wildly when you introduce real-world factors, different lighting, movement, clothing, skin tones, body types.
So, promising potential, but consistency and reliability across the board in messy, real-world situations is still the major hurdle.
That's the crux of it, yes. Moving from the lab to reliable, everyday use is a huge leap.
Given these challenges, it makes sense it's not widespread. But where is it being used even in limited ways in clinical settings today? And what do staff think?
Well, there are some interesting niche applications showing potential. A key one is in neonatal intensive care units and ICUs. They're using camera-based systems, this IPPG technology.
Right, the light reflection one.
Exactly, to monitor heart rate, breathing, temperature, oxygen saturation without sticking electrodes on fragile babies. That's a clear benefit there. It's also been used for patients undergoing hemodialysis. Continuous monitoring during that process can be valuable. And there are trials, like one mentioned at the Royal Melbourne Hospital, using radar and thermal scanners for rapid assessment of older patients, maybe in emergency settings.
Trying to spot deterioration quickly.
Precisely. And another review looked at 15 hospital studies using non-contact cameras for heart rate and rhythm monitoring in adult settings, ERs, post-op, general wards. But even that review concluded there are still ongoing challenges with patient movement, illumination, and technique standardization. That theme keeps coming up.
Reliability in the real world. So what about staff perceptions? Are clinicians open to this?
The research on staff views is still limited, according to the source, but one study in an ICU setting found staff thought the concept was generally acceptable. They could see potential benefits for patients, like less skin irritation, and for themselves, maybe making monitoring easier.
So conceptually, they're open to it.
Conceptually, yes. They see it may offer a sustainable solution. But, and this is crucial, they also stress that staff need to be comfortable and familiar with the system and able to troubleshoot issues independently.
Training and usability are key.
Absolutely. And the source makes a vital point. Perceived acceptability does not equate to proven reliability or accuracy. Just because staff like the idea doesn't mean the tech itself is ready and trustworthy for critical decisions.
That's a really important distinction, acceptance versus validated performance. Okay, so assuming the tech does eventually reach that point of reliability, we hit another massive area, the human element through ethics, continuous sensor data collection, especially in a place like a prison. That sounds like an ethical minefield, as you put it earlier.
It absolutely is. And the source is very explicit about the ethical concerns that need addressing before any wide rollout. Top of the list is privacy. Continuous, potentially detailed monitoring in a space where privacy is already minimal raises huge questions. What data is kept? For how long? Who sees it?
And how is it used?
Yeah. Exactly. Which leads to data management. How is this sensitive data stored securely? Who controls access? What prevents misuse or data breaches? Then there's bias. Bias in the algorithms themselves, if they're trained on limited data sets, they might not work accurately for everyone, potentially leading to disparities in care based on ethnicity, gender, or health conditions.
So the tech itself could be discriminatory.
Potentially, yes, if not developed and tested very carefully on diverse populations. Which ties into fairness. Ensuring the technology is applied equitably and doesn't worsen existing inequalities within the justice system. And perhaps the thorniest issue, informed consent.
Can someone in custody truly give free and informed consent to being monitored 24/7 by sensors?
It's incredibly complex. The power dynamic, the restricted freedom. Does refusal have consequences? Are the alternatives, like constant physical checks, presented as coercive? Achieving genuine informed consent in that context is profoundly difficult.
Yeah, that seems almost impossible to navigate ethically.
It's extremely challenging. And the source concludes that tackling these issues, privacy, data management, bias, fairness, consent, is absolutely crucial. We need transparency, accountability, robust oversight. Basically, we need to build trustworthy and ethically sound systems before deployment. Otherwise, the potential harms could outweigh the benefits.
It really forces you to think, doesn't it? As you hear about this, you, the listener, what privacy concerns jump out at you, especially for people in such a vulnerable situation already. It's this constant balancing act, safety versus fundamental rights. Okay, so we have the promise, the massive technical challenges, these deep ethical questions, and a clear lack of synthesized knowledge, specifically for the custodial context. This is exactly why this global scoping review protocol we're discussing is so vital, right? To map out what we actually know.
Precisely. The authors explicitly state that no reviews to date have synthesized the evidence base in this specific setting. We just don't have that comprehensive picture. So this review protocol aims to fill 3 key knowledge gaps. First, A, to what extent has this tech actually been implemented in custodial settings? Not theory, but real-world use. Where, how, what kind?
Getting a baseline of current practice.
Exactly. Second, B, what's the acceptability and feasibility for custodial staffs? Thinking about the well-being and safety of both the incarcerated people and the staff themselves. Do staff find it usable? Trustworthy? How does it impact their job?
The practicalities for the people running the system.
Yes. And third, see feasibility and acceptability from the perspective of all end users. This includes people detained, the officers, and healthcare staff involved. A truly holistic view.
Everyone who interacts with the system.
Right. And just to reiterate that point you made earlier, this is a scoping review. It aims to map the existing literature, not give a precise number for how common the tech is. It's about finding out what research has been done.
Understanding the research landscape itself. Makes sense. So how are they planning to conduct this mapping exercise? You mentioned the protocol is incredibly rigorous.
It really is. They're following established high-level frameworks, developed using Joanna Briggs Institute JBI guidelines. That's a global standard for evidence synthesis. They're also using ARCSI and O'Malley's framework for scoping reviews, a well-respected methodological approach. And they'll report findings using the PRISMA extension for scoping reviews, which is all about transparency and completeness in reporting. So top-tier methodologies.
Built on solid scientific foundation.
Definitely. The search strategy is vast. 6 major databases: Medline, PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science, ProQuest, Google Scholar, searched from their beginning up to early February 2024. Plus, crucially, searching gray literature.
The unpublished stuff, conference papers.
Exactly. Reports, websites of organizations like the International Corrections and Prisons Association, specific tech conference proceedings, trying to capture the absolute cutting edge. The search terms were developed with a research librarian, very specific combinations relating to contactless monitoring, custody, self-harm, suicide, etc., to be both comprehensive and focused.
Getting the search right is half the battle, isn't it?
It really is. Their inclusion criteria are broad. Any study design, RCTs, qualitative reviews, etc. No country restrictions initially, though it is limited to English language publications.
Okay, that's one limitation.
Yes. The selection process is multi-stage and independent. 2 reviewers screen titles abstracts, then full texts, with a third resolving conflicts. Double screening at all stages to minimize bias.
Rigorous checks and balances.
Very much so. And data extraction uses a standardized tool, again with multiple independent reviewers, followed by analysis and a narrative summary. It's designed to be systematic and robust at every step.
That sounds incredibly thorough. What would you say are the real standout strengths of this particular plan?
Well, connecting it all, 2 things really stand out. First, that incredibly comprehensive search strategy, mixing major databases with that deep dive into gray literature. That's vital for a fast-moving tech topic. Second, and I think this is really powerful, is the diverse background of the research team. It's not just academics in one field. You've got an expert with lived experience of incarceration and mental ill health.
That's huge.
It's invaluable. Plus, academics, clinicians, managers, stakeholders, industry folks from psychology, nursing, engineering, police, medicine, justice health, forensic mental health.
A truly multidisciplinary team.
Exactly. And that means they'll interpret the findings from multiple angles. The engineer sees technical feasibility, the psychologist sees mental impact, the person with lived experience sees the human dignity aspect. It allows for a much richer, more nuanced understanding of the evidence.
That diverse expertise sounds critical for such a complex issue. But you mentioned the English language limitation. Are there any other limitations the authors themselves acknowledge in the protocol?
Yes, they point out one other significant one. Correctional officers are not included as stakeholders within the research team itself for this specific review.
That seems like a gap, given they're the primary users in many ways.
It is a potential gap. While the review aims to find studies about officer perspectives, not having their direct input on the review team means some practical operational nuances might be missed during the interpretation phase. It's something they're transparent about.
So the English-only limitation and the lack of direct correctional officer input on the review team itself, fair enough to acknowledge those. But let's circle back to something you highlighted as a major strength, that patient and public involvement, the PPI. Having someone with lived experience directly involved, how exactly did that work, and what difference did it make?
This is a really excellent aspect of the protocol. They had a public partner with lived experience of incarceration and mental ill health involved right from the design phase, through conduct, reporting, and even planning how to share the results. This partner reviewed the draft protocol, gave feedback, and their insights directly shaped the research questions.
How so?
Well, their curiosity about what tech is actually available and their perspective on the perceived benefits and drawbacks from an end-user viewpoint helped refine what the review needed to look for. It wasn't just academics deciding what's important, it was grounded in real-world questions.
Making sure the research asks the right questions, the ones that matter on the ground.
Exactly. And this person isn't just a consultant, they're a co-author, reflecting their intellectual contribution. They also shared their priorities, which will inform the discussion section of the final review. And importantly, the team committed to creating plain language summaries for consumer organizations, making the findings accessible.
That's fantastic.
It really is. This kind of deep PPI makes the research more relevant, more credible, and ultimately more likely to have a real impact because it's answering questions that matter to the community it affects. Research with, not just on.
That lived experience input feels like it elevates the whole endeavor. Okay, we have covered a huge amount of ground today. We started with the really stark reality of self-harm and suicide in custody, a global crisis. We looked at traditional monitoring, its necessity, but also its serious flaws, the intrusiveness, the time lags, the potential for misinterpretation. Then we explored the potential of contactless monitoring, the promise of continuous non-intrusive vigilance using tech like radar and AI.
Mm-hmm.
But follow that quickly with a reality check. The major technical hurdles still facing it, the need for validation, especially in complex, real-world
The
settings.
noise, the movement, the false alarms.
Exactly. And then we delved into the really complex human and ethical side, privacy, data, bias, consent, huge issues to navigate. And finally, we unpacked this incredibly thorough protocol for a global review designed to map out everything we currently know, bringing together diverse expertise and, crucially, lived experience.
It really shows how these big societal problems require such multifaceted approaches, doesn't it? Technology is part of the puzzle, but only one part. Ethics, human factors, systemic issues, they're all interconnected.
Absolutely. And it leaves us, and you, the listener, with some big questions to think about. Given everything we've discussed, the ethical tightrope of surveillance and custody, how do we balance that urgent need to prevent harm and save lives with fundamental human rights like privacy and dignity? How can surveillance enhance care without becoming just another layer of control?
And perhaps just as importantly, what about the non-technological solutions? Things like radically improving mental health care access within prisons, creating more humane conditions, better staff training in communication and de-escalation, addressing the root causes that lead people into the justice system in the first place. How can those essential human-centered approaches work alongside, or perhaps even reduce the need for, some of these technological interventions, creating a truly holistic system focused on well-being?
Complex questions with no easy answers. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive today. We hope it's given you a clearer, more nuanced perspective on this incredibly important issue. Food for thought on technology, ethics, and human compassion in some of society's most challenging environments. Until next time.